There's something unsettling about silence, the kind that hangs heavy in the air long after everyone's gone. Long after the last light has flickered and died. In the quiet town of Ellensworth, nestled between fog-draped hills and whispering woods, silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a presence in itself. People didn't talk about the house on Braxton Hill anymore. They avoided its name, crossed the street when walking past it, and taught their children to never, ever look at the third window on the second floor, the one that always seemed to be open, no matter how tightly it was locked the night before. But some stories don't die with time. Some secrets claw their way through generations, waiting, no, begging, to be found. Ethan Rowe wasn't from Ellensworth. He was a documentary filmmaker, fresh out of university, chasing stories that people refused to tell. He believed that behind every silence, there was a voice waiting to scream. When he stumbled upon Ellensworth during a routine cross-country trip, he didn't intend to stay more than a night. But then he saw it, the house, not just with his eyes, but with something deeper, primal, almost instinctual. He couldn't explain why he parked his car and stood there for 10 minutes, just staring. It was as if the house had reached out and placed a cold hand on his chest. Locals were tight-lipped. He asked about the house, and they changed the subject. He asked again, and they told him to leave. Not all doors should be opened. An old man at the diner warned, eyes not meeting his. But Ethan was persistent. That was his curse, and his gift. He needed to know why this house, this town, was hiding something so fiercely. What he didn't realize was that by asking the wrong questions, he had already opened the first door. In the following days, Ethan began to dig. What started as curiosity slowly turned into obsession. Old library records, newspaper clippings, faded photos. He discovered the house once belonged to Dr. Malcolm Grayson, a brilliant psychiatrist, philanthropist, and accused cult leader who mysteriously disappeared after being implicated in the death of 7 patients under his care. All the charges had been dropped due to lack of evidence. But Ethan knew better. Evil doesn't vanish, it waits. One night, while reviewing footage he'd taken near the house, Ethan saw something strange, a figure in the upstairs window. Not a reflection, not a trick of light, a face, and it was looking straight at him. That was the night Ethan decided to enter the house. And it was the last night he would ever sleep without fear. The wind howled through the twisted trees lining Braxton Hill as Ethan stood before the iron gate, now rusted and choked with creeping vines. Moonlight flickered through scattered clouds, casting moving shadows across the ground. He tightened his grip on the camcorder, its red recording light blinking steadily like a heartbeat. It was 2:13 a.m., the hour when even ghosts forget they were once human. He had waited 3 nights. 3 nights of watching, documenting, waiting for a sign, and then the face in the window appeared again, unmistakable. Not imagined, not hallucinated. It was time, pushing open the gate with a groan that sounded almost like protest. Ethan stepped onto the stone path. The air grew colder with each step toward the house, as though it were inhaling, preparing to swallow him whole. He had been in abandoned buildings before, hospitals, orphanages, even underground bunkers, but nothing felt like this. It was as if the house had memory. It remembered things. The front door stood slightly ajar, just enough to beckon him. He hesitated, swallowed hard, then pushed it open with a long, creaking moan. His flashlight beam cut across the hallway, peeling wallpaper, cracked picture frames, a broken chandelier hanging precariously above. Dust hung in the air like ash. Day 1, interior entry. Ethan whispered to the camera. This is the Grayson estate, estimated to have been abandoned since 1984, following the disappearance of Dr. Malcolm Grayson. Locals claim the house is haunted. I intend to find out why. He moved cautiously, documenting every corner of the entrance hall. The staircase curved upward like a serpent, its wooden railing carved with intricate symbols he didn't recognize, almost occult in design. On the walls were faded portraits, their eyes gouged out or burned away. Some frames were empty, as if their subjects had escaped. As Ethan ventured deeper, the sounds of the house came alive. Not just the groans of old wood, but whispers, faint, like breath caught in a sigh. He paused, turned his head. Nothing. He entered what appeared to be the study. Books were scattered across the floor, some open to pages blackened by mold, others filled with handwritten notes in spidery cursive. he found a leather-bound journal embossed with the initials MG. Inside were entries filled with disturbing detail, accounts of patients, therapy sessions, and something he called the inversion protocol. One passage stood out: "The patient's resistance has increased. Her dreams are lucid now." She describes the entity with unsettling precision. "Always the same face, always the same whispers. I believe the ritual is working, but something is changing." The house responds. Ethan snapped photos of the pages and carefully returned the journal to his bag. There was no electricity, but as he turned to leave the study, the overhead lamp flickered once. He froze. No sound, no footsteps, but the room felt different. He aimed the flashlight toward the door, and saw it. A reflection in the glass of a display cabinet, a figure standing just outside the doorway. Pale, still, he spun around, nothing there. His breath quickened. The footage, he told himself. Review the footage later. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe. He moved to the kitchen next. The air here was colder. He noticed claw-like marks gouged into the wooden pantry door. Old, yes, but deliberate, as if someone or something had tried desperately to get out, or in. Inside the pantry, he found jars sealed with wax. Inside were preserved animal hearts. And beneath them, symbols scrawled in what looked like dried blood. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he documented everything. "This is more than a haunting," he murmured. "This is ritualistic. Cult behavior, possibly ongoing." As he turned to leave the kitchen, a sharp, piercing sound rang out behind him, like glass shattering underwater. The hallway was empty, but the mirror at the end had cracked down the center, from the inside. His instinct screamed at him to leave, but something stronger held him there. Obsession, maybe, or a pull far darker. He made his way upstairs, each step groaning beneath his weight. On the second floor, the temperature dropped drastically. His breath fogged before him. The hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with closed doors, each bearing a different symbol carved deep into the wood. Some were mathematical, others resembled ancient runes. One was smeared with something dark and flaking. Ethan opened the first door. It was a child's room. Torn teddy bears, a cracked crib, scribbled drawings on the walls, spirals, eyes, figures standing in circles. One depicted a man surrounded by fire, his face obscured by dozens of tiny hands. Then he heard it, a soft lullaby, sung off-key, drifting through the air from nowhere. He turned, heart pounding, and saw a small wooden music box on the floor. It was turning slowly, playing, even though it hadn't been touched. He knelt to examine it. The melody was faintly familiar, though he couldn't place it. As the tune slowed to a stop, the room went deathly silent. Then a whisper, barely audible, "You shouldn't be here." Ethan stumbled back, flashlight shaking in his grip. The voice wasn't his own. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. The whisper still echoed faintly in the corners of the child's room, like it had no intention of leaving. His flashlight flickered once, then steadied. He scanned the room again, no movement, no figure, but the atmosphere had shifted. The air was no longer just cold, it was thick, like breathing through wet cloth. He backed out slowly, heart racing, and turned into the hallway once more. The doors stretched on in both directions. He counted 5 on the left, 3 on the right. He reached for the next one. It opened with surprising ease. Inside was what appeared to be a bedroom, minimalist, clinical, a simple desk, a bed without sheets, and tall bookshelves lined with ancient tomes, many in Latin or languages he didn't recognize. But it wasn't the books that caught his eye, it was the floor. A massive sigil had been etched into the hardwood, nearly spanning the width of the room. Lines intersected in geometric precision, like a mandala corrupted by something evil. Burn marks circled its edges, and the center was stained dark, almost black. He stepped around it carefully, filming the entire design. There was writing on the wall near the headboard. "Only the dreamers can open the gate." It was scratched into the plaster, again and again, like the person who wrote it couldn't stop. Some lines bled into each other. Below it, a name, Lena. Ethan felt a pang of unease. That name had appeared in Dr. Grayson's journal. Lena Hargrove, the sensitive patient, the one who described the entity in her dreams. She'd been committed under Grayson's care for nearly 6 months before her sudden transfer to a private facility that no longer existed. He turned off the camera for a moment, resting his hand against the desk. As he did, he noticed an envelope tucked beneath a book. It was sealed with wax, the same sigil burned into the floor. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside were pages from Lena's therapy sessions, transcribed in shaky handwriting. Session 3. She awoke screaming, claimed to have seen the room again, the circle of fire. The watchers in masks, the voice that spoke in echoes, said she couldn't remember what it said, only that it promised freedom through inversion. Session 4. Lena refused to sleep, says the dreams are becoming real. Woke up with markings on her skin, same pattern as the sigil. Her eyes bled for 6 minutes. I've never seen anything like it. Ethan exhaled sharply. The more he uncovered, the less this seemed like delusion and more like ritual preparation. These weren't hallucinations, they were stages. He filmed the documents, then turned back toward the hallway. But the hallway was gone. In its place was a long corridor of endless doors, a nightmare maze that hadn't been there moments before. He blinked. No, this isn't right, he muttered. He took a step back into the room. Now it too had changed. The bed was gone. The sigil was glowing faintly red, like embers under ash. The writing on the wall had multiplied. It now covered every inch of the surface, spiraling inward toward the ceiling. The words in dozens of languages, none he could read. Panic set in. He turned back to the corridor, trying to retrace his steps. He reached for his camera, rewound the last few minutes, and stared at the footage. In the video, the hallway had never changed. It was still there, the normal walls, the wooden floor, the staircase in the distance. His reality had shifted, but the recording hadn't. He looked up. The corridor remained distorted, wrong. Was the camera capturing truth? Or was it lying? Focus, he whispered. This house is playing tricks. He closed his eyes, took a slow breath, then stepped forward. The doors passed him one by one, each one marked with a different rune. At the 10th door, he stopped. The rune was the same as on the envelope. The dreamer's mark. He opened it. A rush of cold air hit him like a wall. Inside was a circular chamber, much larger than any room should have been. The walls were covered in mirrors, all cracked, all reflecting different versions of the room, and of him. In one, he looked older. In another, blood dripped from his eyes. One reflection turned away from him while the rest continued to stare. A large chair sat in the center of the room. A figure was seated there, a woman with long black hair, wearing a hospital gown stained with ink. Her head was bowed. Ethan approached cautiously. "Lena?" he asked. No response. As he stepped closer, the mirrors began to vibrate, resonating with a deep, low hum. The air buzzed like static electricity. He stopped 2 meters from the chair. "Lena Hargrove?" The figure raised her head. Her eyes were empty sockets. But somehow, she saw him. She smiled, not with joy, but with knowing. Then she whispered, "He's coming through the dreams now." You brought him closer. A shockwave burst outward. Ethan was thrown back against the wall, his camera skidding across the floor. The lights inside the room exploded in a burst of sparks. When he opened his eyes, the chair was empty. Lena was gone, and in the mirror across from him, his reflection was still seated in the chair. Watching him, Ethan's heart raced as he picked himself up from the floor, the world spinning around him. He had barely registered the absence of Lena before the room began to change again. The mirrors shimmered, then cracked open like a shattered glass veil, revealing something far darker beyond. The air grew suffocating, thick with a presence that made every inch of his skin prickle. The temperature plummeted, and his breath fogged in the air. As his hands scrambled for balance, he saw something in the corner of his eye, a shadow. No, it wasn't a shadow, it was movement, slowly, like a tide rising. Something crawled out of the mirror. A figure, indistinct, blurry, and dark, began to take shape. A silhouette of something tall, twisted, and grotesque. Ethan's blood ran cold as he realized that it was not human. The figure's body was made of shifting shadows, jagged, like a broken nightmare trying to piece itself together. Its face, or what could have been a face, was barely visible, a mass of contorted features. He scrambled to his feet, his hands fumbling for his camera, but the lens had cracked when he hit the floor. The footage was useless now. His heart hammered against his chest as the figure moved toward him. Its slow, deliberate steps making the air seem heavier, thicker. Each step reverberated through the room, each one bringing with it the overwhelming sensation of hunger. Ethan stumbled backward, his mind reeling. He had read about things like this in obscure texts, studied the works of occultists who wrote about beings that existed between the veil of life and death. He had always believed them to be nothing more than myth. Now, he realized how terribly wrong he was. The entity stepped closer, its form became more defined, and Ethan could see now that its face was no face at all, but a distortion, a swirling mass of eyes, mouths, and twisted expressions. It was constantly changing, each flicker revealing a different set of faces, each one contorted in agony or rage. "WH, what are you?" Ethan stammered, the words barely escaping his lips. His body screamed for him to run, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. He was paralyzed by fear, by the unnatural cold that pressed down on him from all sides. The entity paused, as if it had heard him, or perhaps understood him in a way no human could. It opened its mouth, or what could have been a mouth, and for the first time, Ethan heard it speak. "I am the door," it rasped, the sound like thousands of voices screaming in unison. "And you have opened it." The room began to pulse, the walls closing in on him as though they were alive. The mirrors, once cracked and shattered, now repaired themselves, reflecting not just his image but something more, shadowy figures behind him. Watching, waiting, the walls seemed to distort, twisting into spirals that led nowhere, as if reality itself was folding inward. Ethan's eyes darted to the door, the one he had come through. It was gone. In its place was a dark void, an endless abyss that beckoned him, like the mouth of some great beast. Panic surged through him, but still, he couldn't move. The air was so thick now, it felt like drowning. The entity, if it could be called that, was closer now. Its form had solidified into something more terrifying, a twisted mockery of humanity. It was human once, he realized. It had been someone, something, but no longer. With a sickening crack, its arm stretched out toward him. It moved faster now, faster than anything could move. In one swift motion, it grabbed his arm, its grip like iron, its coldness sinking into his skin. Ethan's scream was cut off, his breath stolen away as the air around him thickened. The figure pulled him closer, its mouth opening wider, showing rows of jagged, broken teeth that looked too big, too unnatural for any human. And then, in that split second, something changed. Ethan wasn't in the room anymore. He wasn't even in his own body. He was standing on a dark, endless plain. The ground beneath him was not solid but shifting, swirling in a vortex of color and shadow. Above him, there was no sky, only a vast void of blackness that stretched beyond perception. In front of him stood a figure, tall and regal, its features obscured by a veil of mist. It spoke, but its voice was not like the one from the entity. This was clear, cold, calculated. "You have broken the barrier," it said. "The door is open. There is no going back." Ethan tried to move, tried to speak, but his body didn't obey. He was trapped in this plane, in this void, unable to control his actions. The figure in front of him raised a hand, and with a single motion, the world around him twisted violently. Pain, unimaginable, searing pain ripped through his body, as if his very soul was being pulled apart. He screamed, but the sound was lost, swallowed by the abyss. Every fiber of his being was stretched to its limit, as if the very fabric of reality itself was being torn at the seams. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Ethan was back in the room, gasping for air, his mind reeling. The entity was gone, but something else had taken its place. The air was heavy with a presence that was more oppressive than before. He could feel it watching him, waiting. Behind him, the door was now visible again, but it wasn't the door he had come through. It was a new door, one that had never been there before, and it was calling to him. The door loomed before Ethan, far larger than any door should have been. Its wood was dark and slick with an unnatural sheen, as though it had been carved from the heart of the abyss itself. The edges glowed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that felt wrong, like a heartbeat too slow, too deliberate. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, paralyzed. He could feel the weight of the air around him, thick with an invisible pressure. His eyes darted to the walls, but they were no longer just walls. The room had shifted once again, the mirrors now reflecting twisted versions of himself. The Ethan in the mirror smiled back at him, its face stretched in a grotesque expression, the eyes filled with malice. "You should not open it," A voice whispered from behind him. Ethan spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. The voice had come from nowhere and everywhere at once. A sound that seemed to come from the very walls themselves, as if the house itself was warning him. The door beckoned him again, this time more insistently. The very air around it hummed with a low, vibrating pulse. It was alive. It wanted him to open it. Ethan's hands trembled as he reached for the handle. His mind screamed at him to turn around, to leave the house before it consumed him. But his body moved of its own accord, the pull of the door too strong to resist. His fingers brushed the cold, slick wood of the handle. It was ice. The moment his skin made contact, a jolt of cold shot up his arm, numbing him to the bone. With a groan that sounded like a tortured breath, the door creaked open. The room beyond was not what he expected. The walls were black, covered in strange symbols that seemed to writhe and move when he looked at them. At the center of the room was a stone altar, slick with something dark and viscous. The air was thick with the smell of decay, but there was also something else, something foul, like burnt flesh mixed with the scent of sulfur. Ethan's stomach churned. The room felt alive, its very existence radiating a palpable sense of dread. His camera was still running, the red light blinking, but the lens had cracked, distorting the footage. It was no longer capturing reality, it was capturing something else, something beyond the veil. His breath hitched as his gaze fell on the altar. There, lying on the cold stone surface, was a body. At first, he thought it was just a corpse, a decayed, long-dead body that had been placed there as some kind of ritual offering. But as he moved closer, he realized with horror that it was not entirely dead. The skin was stretched taut over the bones, pale and sickly, but the eyes were wide open, staring directly at him. The face was familiar. Lena. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out, just a low rasping noise, as if something inside her was fighting to break free. Ethan recoiled, but his feet refused to move. He was rooted to the spot, unable to look away from her empty, accusing eyes. Then, just as he was about to step back, the room seemed to shift again. The symbols on the walls began to glow, the light turning red and hot, like fire. The altar groaned, the stone shifting beneath Lena's body. Something was happening, something terrible, something that felt like the house itself was coming alive. The air grew thick with the stench of sulfur and rot, the temperature rising with each passing second. Ethan gasped for breath, the oppressive weight of the room pressing down on him. His mind was swimming with thoughts of escape, of survival. But the door behind him was gone again. The room was closing in. There was no way out. Then, a voice, a low, guttural whisper that echoed in his mind. "You are too late." Ethan's blood ran cold. He whirled around, but there was no one there. The voice was inside his head now, pressing against his thoughts, forcing its way into his consciousness. The altar shifted again, the body on it jerking violently. Lena's eyes flickered, and for the first time, her mouth opened wide, releasing a guttural scream that rattled the walls. The scream was not human. Ethan stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. Lena's body contorted unnaturally, the skin stretching and tearing as something crawled from within. It was a figure, a dark, twisted version of a man, hunched and grotesque, his body crawling out of Lena's chest as though he were born from her. He was enormous, his arms long and grotesque, his face a malformed mass of jagged teeth and shattered features. The figure stood slowly, towering over Lena's twitching, convulsing body, its eyes, glowing, fiery orbs, locked onto Ethan's, and in that instant, he understood. This was the entity, the thing Lena had been trying to warn him about. It was not just an apparition. It was not just a shadow. It was real, and it was here. The figure took a step toward him, its mouth opening to reveal rows of sharp, broken teeth. The room seemed to contract around him, the air thickening until he could barely breathe. The ground beneath him began to tremble, and the walls seemed to close in, pressing him toward the altar, toward the entity. Ethan's legs finally moved. He turned and ran, the sound of his footsteps pounding in his ears as he scrambled toward the door that wasn't there anymore. He felt the cold breath of the entity on his neck, the air heavy with the sound of its growling, its hunger. There was no escape. The walls around him stretched out, a labyrinth with no end. He could hear the entity's voice inside his head now, whispering promises, lies, and threats in the same breath. The floor beneath him cracked, and the world itself seemed to bend and break, as though he were being drawn into the very fabric of the house, swallowed by the curse that had been laid upon it. And as the darkness closed in, as the entity's growls grew louder, one thought pierced through the terror in Ethan's mind. There is no way out. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted through the labyrinth of corridors, each step a desperate attempt to escape the nightmarish entity that stalked him. The walls around him seemed to warp and bend, growing closer, closing in. The once familiar layout of the house now felt alien, as if the structure itself had transformed into something that knew only darkness and malice. His breath came in ragged gasps, his legs aching from the frantic run. But no matter how fast he moved, no matter how many twists and turns he took, the oppressive weight of the house seemed to follow him. He could still feel the presence of the entity, its cold, hungry eyes watching him, always a step behind. He could hear its voice now, low and rasping, curling around his mind like a noxious vapor. There is nowhere to run. Ethan, you belong to me now. The words were not spoken aloud, but seemed to invade his very thoughts, each syllable sinking into his mind like a cold dagger. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to focus. He couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. His fingers brushed the walls as he ran, the rough texture of the wood biting into his skin. The house itself seemed to be alive, its very bones shifting beneath his feet, pulsating with an energy that felt wrong. Every turn he made led him deeper into the maze of corridors, farther away from any hope of escape. He needed to find the way out, but all paths seemed to converge into the same oppressive darkness. Finally, he reached a door. His hand shot out, grasping the handle, but when he tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. It was locked. Of course it was. He slammed his shoulder against the door, but it wouldn't give. Frustration built up inside him, mixing with the rising terror. He didn't have much time. He glanced around the hallway. To his left, a faint light flickered from beneath a door at the end of the corridor. Something about it drew him in, like a distant beacon. With no other choice, he sprinted toward it, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As he reached the door, he paused. The air was unnaturally still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. He could feel the entity's presence behind him, its hunger growing stronger by the second. Taking a deep breath, he shoved the door open. Inside, the room was cold and empty, the only light coming from an eerie, pulsating glow emanating from the center of the room. Ethan stepped inside, his eyes searching for the source of the light. It was a circular stone slab, cracked and weathered with age. The symbols that had been etched into the walls of the house were now carved into the stone, glowing faintly with an otherworldly energy. This was it, the heart of the house, the source of the darkness. Ethan approached the slab cautiously, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. His instinct screamed at him to turn back, to run, but he couldn't, not now. He had come too far, and he had to know the truth. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the stone. The moment his skin made contact, the room shuddered violently, and the air around him turned electric. A wave of energy surged through him, ripping through his body like a lightning strike. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he felt as though he was being pulled into the very fabric of the universe itself. "You shouldn't have come here," a voice whispered, deep and guttural, resonating from the very stone. "This is where it ends." Ethan gasped, his breath ragged as he fought to keep his balance. The room around him shifted, the walls bending and twisting into grotesque shapes. He could see faces in the shadows, twisted and deformed, their eyes wide with terror as if they were trapped in the same nightmare he was. He recognized some of them. They were people who had come before him, those who had tried to uncover the house's secrets and had failed. His mind raced. The house didn't just trap people, it consumed them. It absorbed their souls, their essence, and then kept them here, as prisoners in this twisted reality. The entity wasn't just a spirit, it was a manifestation of all the souls it had devoured, a being born from the collective suffering of countless victims. Ethan stumbled back, his heart hammering in his chest. The entity was more than just a monster. It was a force of pure, malevolent energy, fed by the pain and terror of those it had claimed. And now, it wanted him. The slab beneath him began to crack, the stone groaning as though it was awakening from a long slumber. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he felt the power of the entity growing stronger. It was breaking through the veil, pushing its way into the physical world. The door was closing, and he was trapped. There was no escape now. The ground trembled beneath him, and the air grew thick with a suffocating heat. Ethan stumbled backward, but the walls seemed to move with him, always keeping him trapped in the center of the room. He could feel the entity's presence closing in on him, its eyes watching him, its hunger palpable. With a cry of desperation, he lunged for the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. The sound of it locking echoed through the room, sealing him inside with the entity. Ethan spun around, his mind racing for a solution. He had to do something. He had to destroy it. But how? How could he possibly fight something that existed beyond the realms of reality? Something that fed on fear, on suffering? The symbols on the stone slab began to glow brighter, pulsating with an intensity that felt like it was tearing at the very fabric of his soul. The entity's voice filled his mind once more, its words a low growl. "You cannot escape. You belong to me, forever." Ethan's eyes locked onto the glowing symbols, a thought forming in his mind. He had seen these symbols before. They were the key to ending this nightmare. He didn't have much time. With a final burst of strength, he charged forward, his hands reaching out to touch the stone once more. The moment his fingers made contact, the entire room exploded with light. The ground shook violently as the entity's scream reverberated through the walls. A sound of pure agony. For a moment, everything went white, and then, silence. The world around Ethan had gone silent. The blinding white light that had consumed him moments ago had finally faded, leaving him standing in the center of an eerie calm. The room was empty, devoid of the oppressive energy that had once filled it. The walls, the symbols, the altar, everything was gone. It was as if the house itself had swallowed everything whole, leaving only an endless, featureless void in its place. Ethan stood still, disoriented, trying to process what had just happened. His body ached, his muscles sore from the terror and the struggle. His breath was shallow, his chest rising and falling with each labored inhale. He could still feel the weight of the entity's presence pressing against his mind. But now, it felt distant, faint, almost as though it had retreated, leaving him with nothing but the memories of its terrifying grasp. For a long moment, he didn't move. He didn't know what to do, where to go, or if he even had the strength to go anywhere. His mind was reeling, filled with questions that had no answers. Had he won? Had he managed to stop the entity, to destroy the house and free himself from its curse? Or had the entity simply let him go, biding its time, waiting for the next soul to wander into its trap? The silence was deafening, the kind of silence that seemed to stretch on forever, like time itself had been suspended in the aftermath of something catastrophic. Then, slowly, Ethan's gaze drifted down to his hands. They were shaking, the fingers trembling uncontrollably as he tried to steady himself. He flexed them, trying to push away the remnants of the fear that still gripped him. But the sensation lingered. The fear wasn't gone. It never truly would be. As his eyes moved upward, his heart skipped a beat. Before him, in the distance, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, pale, gaunt, and disheveled. Her eyes were hollow, empty sockets. The skin stretched tightly over the bones of her face. Lena, she stepped toward him, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she was still tethered to the very earth beneath her feet by some invisible force. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, the sound of a tortured scream filled the air, the kind of scream that echoed through Ethan's very soul. He could feel her pain, her suffering, her desperate need to be freed from whatever had trapped her here. Ethan took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. Was she a ghost, a lingering memory of the entity's victims? Or was she something else entirely, something twisted by the curse of the house? Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Ethan saw something he hadn't expected. A flicker of recognition, a flicker of understanding. It was as if she knew him, as if she had been waiting for him. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the air, as if trying to touch him. Her lips parted, forming a single word, a whisper that seemed to come from deep within the very core of the house itself. Run. The voice was weak, but it carried with it an undeniable urgency. It was a warning, a plea. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Without thinking, he turned and ran. The ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as though it, too, was trembling. The very air around him seemed to shift and warp, as though the house was collapsing around him. He could feel the walls closing in, the darkness creeping at the edges of his vision. But he didn't stop. He ran, faster than he had ever run in his life, the sound of his footsteps echoing in his ears. The house, the entity, was not done with him. He could feel it in his bones. It was still there, lingering in the corners of his mind, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. As he ran, the light ahead of him grew brighter. The shadows began to recede, and the air grew cooler, fresher. He could see the door, the real door, the way out. But when he reached it, when his hand touched the handle, something in him hesitated. It wasn't fear, it was something else, something deeper. He turned, glancing back at the now vanishing figure of Lena, who had faded into the shadows. He could hear her faint whisper once more, this time clearer than before. "You can't escape." Ethan's heart clenched. The words echoed in his mind, and for a split second, he questioned everything. Was there a way out? Was this all just part of the entity's game? Or had he truly broken free? The door opened, he stepped through, and the world outside greeted him. The sun was rising, casting its golden light over the landscape. The air was crisp, and the sound of birds chirping filled the silence. It was peaceful, ordinary, but Ethan knew better than to think it was over. As he walked away from the house, the weight in his chest remained. The fear, the haunting feeling that something was still watching him, that he had never truly escaped. The entity had been with him all along, hiding in the shadows of his mind, waiting for the moment when he would let his guard down. The house, the entity, they were not gone. They were part of him now. And just as the darkness had been born from the suffering of the past, so too would it continue to grow, fed by the fear and pain of those who dared to uncover its secrets. Ethan didn't look back, but as he walked into the distance, he couldn't shake the feeling that the entity's eyes were still watching him, waiting, and one day, it would find him again.